off playing red green on turn 1, and you would happily slam standstill down on turn 2 just to take the 1 a turn, because 8 turns later you'd have out 9 lands.
I remember you talking about that actually. I learned a lot when you were talking about that. Like one of those things where I'd considered that, but always been a little less than fully confident in myself when I made those decisions, because it seems so counterintuitive to put standstill out when you're in a situation that you inevitably lose the game and you're going to have to break your own standstill. It's
Right. Well, I mean, that's a different decision, but like in this situation, it kind of shows you why that was probably correct back then.
Right.
The reason being the one damage a turn is not an acceptable clock on a control deck. The control decks generally have a much better late game than the decks applying the pressure.
Right.
In this case, Sphinx's Revelation and then Wrath of Gods and Snapcasters and hard counter spells.
Sure.
Back then, it was Upheaval Psychotog, just game-winning combo. So, I mean, more often than not back then, if you were taking 1 a turn for all those turns, then you'd end a turn Factor Fiction, you'd untap an Upheaval Psychotog, and the game would be over. Or, if you didn't have the Upheaval, you'd untap Cast Psychotog and then have some counters in your hand.
See, now that's why I think Magic is endlessly fascinating to me, because just when you think you have it figured out, okay, standstill is pretty straightforward, or this, whatever the situation that's analogous to that may be, just when you think it's very straightforward of, I'm the one that has pressure, and I'm playing against somebody who can't utilize their cards correctly, you have to actually define what pressure is. Pressure
right,
can't
every
simply
game is different.
Pressure can't simply be, I have a threat, they don't, and their cards are disadvantageous for that reason. You have to actually, compute how threatening does this need to be in order to be relevant against their clock, because really on some level a control deck has a clock as well, right? If you're resolving a Sphinx's Revelation for a significant number, it's basically a clock as well.
Right. I mean, as a control deck, you generally have inevitability, meaning, you're going to win the game if you don't lose it. So, I mean, you could call that a clock, certainly. There's nothing wrong with that. Generally, I think of a clock as ticking, as damage on you. And obviously, inevitability gets stronger and stronger as the turns go on, as you approach your ability to Revelation for more and more, or cast your Upheaval and then Psychotog, whatever it may be. But yeah, you're generally trying to, if you're an aggro deck, you're generally trying to kill the control deck before they can bring their late game online. If you're the control deck, you're trying to do everything possible to bring out this powerful late game. And where Magic gets fun is when in my opinion, is when the lines aren't as clear cut. Like, for example, this token deck is kind of sweet because I'm sure it plays as the control deck against certain types of decks, like Naya Blitz and Jund Aggro, and it plays as the aggro deck against a more pure control deck like an Esper Control.
I admit that I underestimated the strategy until Brian Eason got second with it at, which GP was that, is it called?
Charleston, I think?
Yeah, I believe so.
I remember that GP.
And he really dominated that tournament in retrospect. I mean, the deck that he lost to in the finals was just really a nightmare for him. So.
What was it, Zombies?
Yeah, it was Zombies, but it was, the first time that Thundermaw Hellkite had been added to the deck, so Brian was completely unprepared for that. I believe he also had some specific technology at the time that was unprecedented. Just maybe it was Night of Infamy for that point in time.
Oh, yeah.
Along those lines.
I played a blue-white control deck in that tournament to top 16, and it was also excellent but couldn't beat Zombies, because Zombies was new. On Moto that week, you were facing a lot of red deck wins and green-white aggro and not much Zombies.
Okay, so back to this match. At this point, it was looking very good for the token player for Josh, but I assume that pretty much really almost regardless of your hand and your opponent's hand, you're going to be feeling very, very strongly about your chances of winning here as the Esper control player.
This is exactly what we were talking about. He was building up, and then as he got to the point where he was going to deal some serious damage, he just got Wrath of Godded, and now he has to start over. And he is going to be able to rebuild the troops. I believe he has a Lingering Soul or two in his graveyard, and he'll be able to get things going again. But as you can see, Dave's already on 6 lands. So I can't see Dave's hand really well right now, but Dave's probably just going to dirtle for a turn or two, Wrath again, and then he'll fire off a Revelation for 6, and the game will be over. Effectively over.
I find it very interesting when we're talking about how to define a clock, and it's semantics to some extent.
Oh, yeah, I'm not trying to argue.
Oh, of course. But I know that for myself personally, I probably veered away from playing aggressive decks too often at a professional level because, frankly, it just was so emotionally devastating to me to be in those situations where the control opponent hits whatever the magic number is of land, 4, 6, 8, whatever it might be in the format, and you just feel hopeless at that point. I think I latched on to playing control because it's over fast when you lose, and it never feels hopeless after that.
Right, no, I think a lot of the better Magic players, including myself, latched on to control for the exact same reason. You want to feel like you can have a game in every game. You want to feel like if you're under pressure, maybe you have the Wrath, or you have the correct draw with spot removal, you always want to feel like you can make decisions and play. When you're the aggro deck, you just put out your spells sometimes, and then they play these powerful sweepers, and you really don't stand a chance.
So, for anybody at home watching this, that loves their intangible virtues and lingering souls. And they're listening to us talk about this being an uphill matchup, and obviously you endorse the deck heavily, the Esper control deck. What kind of sideboard strategy would you recommend to get your equity as high as possible?
Well, as you can see, the key card in the matchup is Wrath, the Supreme Verdict. So, I mean, I would think you would want to sideboard Rootborn Defenses, Boros Charm if you have a red splash, something that, is going to stop them from wrathing you.
Is it to the point where you would consider Nevermore as well, or you stick with the synergetic Rootborn Defenses?
Nevermore's fine. Rootborn Defense is probably better. I mean, there's a few different kinds of board sweepers. There's I guess Terminus gets around defenses anyway, but Planar Cleansing doesn't. I guess I would feel kind of silly if I never moored Supreme Verdict and then they Planar Cleansing. But for the most part, it seems like Supreme Verdict is the sweeper of choice. So yeah, I think Nevermore's a fine card. I think any of that is good. I think if I were playing tokens against Esper, I would want to have access to Rootborn Defenses or Nevermore. Maybe a combination. Obviously, you don't want to end up with a handful of Rootborn Defenses, so I could easily see something like 2 Rootborn, 1 Nevermore in your sideboard.
How effective is trying to diversify your threats? Just playing, a package of more Garruk Relentlesses, possibly Sorin Lord of Innistrad if you can support it with black. Is just having a more diverse threat suite sufficient?
I don't think that's going to be enough, although I do think it will help. I mean, nothing can beat everything. While this might not be a very good matchup for the token deck, they probably do well against the aggro deck since they put so many speed bumps out and then really amass a lot of things. And decks like Jund Aggro and Naya Blitz are not particularly good matchups for Esper Control. They're very fast. They put you on a real serious clock. If you don't have a Supreme Verdict turn 4, you almost automatically lose. A pure control deck like Esper tends to be a lot better against the more mid-rangey decks. The decks like red, blue, white, and tokens that are better against the aggro decks. That's the rock, paper, scissors aspect.
So, to rephrase a little bit of that, I take it that you're saying that if you do elect to play the token deck, that in order to maintain your good percentage against a deck like Jund Aggro or Naya Blitz, that you'd recommend not playing with cards that expensive, or at least not a huge threshold of them?
Yeah, I wouldn't go over the deep end trying to beat your bad matchup. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. When they're talking about their deck, they always want to say it beats everything. Decks don't beat everything, if
I was as guilty of that as anybody. I must have tweaked my Forbidian list countless hours per day in the endless pursuit to beat everything, and most likely didn't.
I frequently run into conversations where, somebody will message me on Facebook and be like, hey, I've been playing your Esper deck, but I can't seem to beat Jund Aggro, with the Falcon Wrath Aristocrats and, the recursion and hasty pressure. What do you do against them? I'm like, no, it's a bad matchup. I usually lose to them when I play them. They're just like, but people play it. I'm like, yeah, but, I have good matchups against Jund and Red, Blue, White, some of the other more popular decks in the format.
Those situations are kind of adorably awkward where someone is innocent and passionate enough to come to you and they're like, look, you're the master that never loses. And I lose sometimes, help me out. What do you consider a good win percentage to have at the Pro Tour or in a local tournament? When are you satisfied with yourself? Now, obviously, I know you well enough to know that if you're 0-8 in a tournament and you played, in your opinion, flawlessly, you're going to be overall happy with yourself.
Yeah.
And if you go 8-0, of course you're going to be excited about the money at stake. But if you played miserably, you're going to be upset and you're going to be talking about it.
Yeah, that's what I try and focus on is my own play. I mean, it's a great game, but it's still a card game where you draw 7 cards at random and then a card at random every turn. So I mean, sometimes if the cards aren't there or your opponent's cards are there, I don't really fret about that too much.
Well, do you have any guidelines for the audience when trying to decide, when and where it's acceptable to just give up percentage?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're trying to maximize percentage, so I mean, generally the process is you're going to think about what you expect the field to be in the tournament, and then after testing out the options, let's say, for example, he jammed 3 Rootborn Defenses into his main deck right now.
Okay.
That would certainly help his Esper matchup and certainly hurt his aggro deck matchups. It's, a card that you can't put out on the board. You can't just leave your 3 open against aggro decks. So generally you would test it out. You would see how much percentage you gain against Esper, how much percentage you lose against aggro by replacing something better against them with it, and then you would predict, do I expect to face a lot of Esper or a lot of aggro in the upcoming tournament? And, you're going for the highest total percentage.
In your experience, because obviously you've been a part of a plethora of geniuses throughout your time in the playtest teams in which you participated. In your experience, do people map this kind of thing out scientifically? Are they keeping thorough track of win and loss records and trying to establish the metagame? Is this something that's being done by feel, or are people drafting and just picking the deck at the last minute that they like?
I can't talk about any of the testing with Channel Fireball because it's all top secret.
Okay.
No, I'm obviously just kidding. We don't really care. We've done full interviews and everything on our testing process, and actually had it filmed sometimes and stuff. Yeah, it's a combination of both. I mean, sometimes we keep some results and some data. A lot of times it's by feel, because you have such a limited amount of time to test for a Pro Tour that you can't just chart 50 games and then be like, okay, we figured out how much percentage we gained. And even 50 games wouldn't be a good sample size for that. So really what you'll do is you'll play like 10 to 20 games, kind of get a feel, and then use your judgment for how much you think you're gaining with the cards. And it's not perfect.
So to check back in on this action, we got 4-3-3 tokens here, I believe, as a Parallel Lives and a Growing Ranks. You still feeling pretty despondent about our chances as the token player here?
Well, I still can't really see Dave's hand. Like he's pretty good at protecting it. It really just depends. I mean.
Oh, there he goes. I think you're psychically linked, but.
Yeah, it really just depends on what he's got. I mean. Clearly, the Esper deck can beat this board, although the board is getting quite impressive. He's going to need to, get rid of everything. I mean, he's got a lot of lands out. I don't know what he's holding. I don't know how he sideboarded or anything like that. Generally, the board starts to look worse for you than it is because you wait to Wrath, you know what I mean? You're not going to play your Terminus or your Supreme Verdict much earlier than you need to.
I suppose an important point would be that green-white token decks don't have a lot of reach, so you have no incentive but to do anything but wait until the last moment.
Exactly, and as you can see, as the board just got really bad, he just Terminus. But obviously, it's going to start regrowing immediately because he gets the token, I think, from that Doom Traveler.
Yes.
And he's got out the Growing Ranks, the Parallel Lives, which is a card I'm familiar with, but I couldn't actually name off the complete text of it. Are you familiar with it?
I can tell you that I do very well on it retail, and it involves tokens.
Yeah, no, I know it's an excellent card. I'm just not really exactly sure what it does.
Let's see what we can do about that.
But presuming that it does some form of doubling tokens, what's going to happen now is he's going to start rebuilding again and force Dave to Wrath again. But once you have the amount of mana out that Dave has, he should basically be able to fire off Revelations and Wraths at will. So while he's going to have to do a lot of work, if the token player doesn't do something to disrupt his ability to Wrath and disrupt his ability to Revelation, it's going to be very tough for him to win. And now he's Wrathing again, and now that the Doom Traveler token is gone, I'm still not 100% what Parallel Lives does, but I'm assuming he's not going to get any tokens during his upkeep, so this is going to buy Dave time to Revelation. And I mean, you can see Dave has out 11 mana, so if he were to cast a Revelation now, it would be for 8. I mean, it's tough to overcome that kind of card drawing. Oh, so it looks like it does something like put out double the number of tokens?
Yes, it's green and 3. If any effect would put tokens under the battlefield under your control, put twice that many on your control instead.
Right, so like, even though every card he plays now is going to be quite powerful, Dave basically has access to his whole deck. You see him Revelationing for 4, which tells me that he probably has another Revelation in his hand, because, I mean, he didn't need a Revelation in a turn there.
Right.
And, I mean, most likely, Dave's just going to keep Revelationing and Wrathing until he decks him with his Drown Yards.
So basically, in your estimation, there's no realistic circumstance here where that Sphinx's Revelation could be correct if he doesn't have a second copy already.
I mean,
it would take a precise combination of cards that basically lock out the game as long as you hit another land or things of that nature. Like, you just need a couple more resources and.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dave's life total is high enough that he could survive the attack for even 12, I think. Especially because he could just, when he attacks for 12, he could just rev for 8 then and gain 8. So there's like no reason to be only revving for 4 when you could have a rev for 8 or 9 the next turn. Unless that you just have more revs already and, you only have so many cards in your library. And one thing this Esper deck does not play is Elixir of Vitality, so you can't go forever. You've got to be milling them along the way, getting them in range to run them out. Part of why I like this Esper deck so much is because you do a lot of work in all of the games. If you're the kind of person who's looking for like quick, easy games, Esper is not for you. It's not so advanced like people think. Like an average player can definitely pick up an Esper deck and play it successfully in a tournament. you're just going to play a lot of long games where you're going to have to do a lot of work. You're going to do a lot of wrathing and milling and recurring things and, Restoration Angel, your augurs.
So perhaps the only issue for a relatively new player picking up Esker is just going to be pace of play.
Yes, that's exactly right. Like, you're going to play long games. So if you can't play quickly, you're